ক্লাস ৬ দেখা যায়, সোহেল ওর ভিডিওটা ও অফ করে রাখে। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ। इंटरव्यू वाला सबसे না ওইখানে মঞ্চে মঞ্চে রে
এত করে শোনা যাচ্ছে। ইউটিউবে স্ট্রেন করছে, আমি এরকম সরকার বলছিলাম
ইউটিউবে দিয়েছো?
ইউটিউবে স্ট্রিমিং চলে ওই জন্যই ভাবছিলাম।
তাহলে আমরা ইউটিউবে যাই।
অনেক বেশি বলেছে।
Yeah.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hello.
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম শোনা যাচ্ছে। হ্যালো
Hello.
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম।
Dr. Patel is yet to win. So we have to wait for 5 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yes, madam, you are.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a cordial welcome to today's session on behalf of Department of Geography, Vivekananda College for Women. It is the third webinar in the Geomorphology series organized by our department. Now, I would like to introduce the man of the day, today's speaker. Dr. Priyank Pravin Patel is a young, enthusiastic, and distinguished geographer and has a high degree of commitment with teaching and research. It's very interesting to know that a fascination with all the strange sounding of exotic place names on maps drew him towards geography in spite of not studying it in high school. Rivers, in particular, are Dr. Patel's chief interest. Their behavior, the spatial and temporal changes occurring across a river basin, and aspects of water resource management. The use of traditional as well as more modern methods to analyze landscapes and their mapping and representation is also of his interest, particularly while exploring land use and land cover changes. He has a keen interest towards analyzing the built environment and how societies occupy them, how space is utilized in rural and urban areas. An awardee of several accolades in academic field, Dr. Patel has more than 35 publications in reputed journals of national as well as international scale. His list of citations seems to be quite appreciable with nearly 164 citations. We will love to hear him on evolution of geomorphological thoughts and ideas today in a short while from now. Now, Dr. Shoma Bhattacharya, our principal madam and an ardent geographer, officially inaugurates the webinar.
Good afternoon. The Department of Geography of our college has organized this webinar on the evolution of geomorphic thoughts and ideas. I convey my warm welcome to all the participants of this webinar, including the teachers of different colleges, research scholars, students of my college and other colleges as well, and my colleagues. It's my pleasure that Priyank Pravin Patel, Assistant Professor of Geography of Presidency University, a young promising researcher, has given his consent to be the speaker of this webinar. The continuing goal of any academic discipline is the advancement of knowledge within its own area of study. Each scientific discipline is a separate academic community, and their goal is the advancement of knowledge. According to Kuhn, scientific community or academic community consists of men who share a paradigm. A paradigm is an accepted problem solution. This, by its very nature, poses the next problem. Progress in science is achieved by problem solving. To undertake research within a paradigm requires understanding and acceptance of its philosophy and methodology. Sometimes an extraordinary research may be conducted outside the boundary of the accepted paradigm. When it is successful, a revolutionary episode is in progress. The result is an alternative paradigm or development of a new concept. In this way, a discipline progresses and accumulates views and ideas. Gradually, an evolutionary history of the subject develops. Study of this evolutionary history of a subject or discipline is necessary for students as it proves the dynamic nature of the subjects and makes it interesting. Today, the evolution of geomorphic thoughts and ideas will be discussed by our young learned friend, Dr. Priyank Parveen Patel, and we are eagerly waiting to hear from him. I wish the webinar a grand success. Thank you all.
শুরু করবো?
হ্যাঁ।
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, madam. Thank you for asking me to speak on this. Right. So I think I can be heard. So I will begin talking. I'll take a little bit more than the stipulated 1 hour because my timing always goes wrong. But please bear with me. What I will also warn you is that today my Wi-Fi connection is a little bit iffy. So if suddenly it disappears, the connection disappears in the middle, just somebody please phone me, right? Acha. And then I will try and get through with hotspot and I will start. All right, so what I will do is I will share a small PowerPoint presentation and then we can begin. Right, so this is the PowerPoint presentation, I think. Right, this is the PowerPoint presentation. Madam, দেখা যাচ্ছে? Hello? Madam, দেখা যাচ্ছে?
Yes,
Hello?
দেখা যাচ্ছে।
So I will begin with this. Right. So evolution of geomorphological thoughts and ideas. The reason why we need to study this or why we should actually want to study this, look into this is, as soon as you hear thoughts and you think, oh my God, this is the class where I have to go to sleep. Or this is the class, where I have to somehow not go to college. But this is important. Why? Because unless you know where you are coming from, you will never know where you are going. You need to have a timeline. When you are doing any research, when you are doing any studies, you need to have a timeline or an idea of what you are building on. because research is incremental. Very often something path-breaking comes along and it becomes outstanding. But usually research is incremental. Slowly, data and information are added up, and then that leads to an entirely new way of understanding, which is a paradigm change, as per Kuhn. Right. So we will talk about geomorphological thoughts and ideas. So what I'll do is I will only focus on the more recent ones, say the last 2 centuries, because the ancients, I think Madam has said that she has covered. So I'll just begin. So just if I go back to the distant past, you know, geomorphology is something that is not just 200 years old. The principles are something that have been used for a very long period of time. And these have been used by a lot of people. So I'll just give you 2 examples. One is, if you see this thing on the right side, this is something called the nilometer. And this nilometer was used by the Egyptians to measure the flood level of the Nile. And if you remember your little bit of thought, যদি মনে থাকে তাহলে Egypt is the gift of the Nile, say Herodotus, 5th century BC. So what they would do is they would see the height of the water level along each of these notches along the Nile bank. And by gauging this, they would understand the flood level. And from that flood level, they would estimate the amount of crop harvest that would happen for that particular year. And you could then plan your entire annual economic cycle based on that. So again, what Herodotus observed, that he thought that, okay, a fundamental question is how old is the earth? And this is a question we will come back to time and again as I go through this. So the one way he thought of answering this question was that he observed every year the Nile left down one layer of silt. So he thought that if you could count the layers of silt, you could actually get a rough age of the earth. So they dug a trench and they counted about 5,000 layers of silt. So according to Herodotus, the earth was about 5,000 years old, right? So this is something that happened there. Then the photo below is of a qanat, Qanat. What is a qanat? A qanat is a very traditional irrigation system that happens in Iran, in the Persian desert. And this is where centuries old. Because there is a dearth of water there, what happens is they dig holes along the slope of a hill. And when there is a little bit of rainfall, it percolates underground. There are underground channels that are connected to each of these qanats. And then the outlet, at the outlet, you get a considerable amount of water. And so you have your settlement there and you irrigate your crops over there. So these are just 2 ways in which geomorphological principles have been used through centuries, right? Because we need the earth to sustain us. Our relation with the earth is always of 2 types, which I keep saying to my students. One is we need to take resources from the earth to sustain ourselves. And the other is that we need to be aware of the hazards that the earth is presenting to us to be safe from them. So the human interaction with the earth is of 2 types. One is of the economic type, one is of the safety type, right? What are the resources that I can accrue from you? What are the ways in which I can stop myself from being hazardously affected by you? And geomorphology plays a lot of role in that, and we'll see that going ahead. So again, very briefly touching on the ancient to the medieval time. So this photo, or this sketch rather, is of Leonardo da Vinci, and he's taking the length of a river, trying to take the width of the river. You will see a small string suspended. The level of the river, there's a small level there, right? So he was one of the pioneer people who would talk about rivers, the way rivers would flow, and he also gave ideas about formation of the earth, about fossils being found high up in the Italian plains, the reasons behind that. And if you have read your continental drift theory and history, you will know what I'm talking about. Apart from that, the reason why we even today we need to look at such old works or old historical aspects is you have heard of Alexander von Humboldt. Now, on the left is a book written on him called The Invention of Nature. And on the right is a very beautiful comic that illustrates for children the adventures of Alexander von Humboldt. But the reason why Humboldt is still relevant today is that we have his notebooks, and he has made a lot of extensive sketches during his tours in South America with Copeland. And what people see now is if he has given a certain water level of river at a certain position, and if he has given the height of a mountain in a certain manner, how much does the water level match with the present day water level of that river or that lake? How much does the slope of the present day mountain with the drawn mountain in the notebook? And from that, we try and understand environmental changes, global warming, and so these things go on, right? Does anyone have a question yet? I think someone has raised a hand. Hello. হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ
can
স্যার
I be
শোনা
heard?
যাচ্ছে।
আচ্ছা, শোনা যাচ্ছে?
ইয়েস স্যার। হ্যাঁ
আচ্ছা,
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ।
ঠিক আছে. So this is something that is, this is why we look to the past, because there are things to learn from the past all the time, right? And also the other point that I will make starting off is that the origin of geomorphology is woven very closely with that of geology. So we actually have to look to the origins of geology to understand where geomorphology comes from, who were the early workers, and how actually these things started out. It wasn't until Davis that a trained geographer, really came up and wanted to do geomorphological work. Earlier, it was all mainly geologists, right, or astronomers and those kinds. So that is something that we will look at. And also, what I'll say right off is I won't be able to cover everything within this time, and because the context is so vast, I will obviously end up missing up some points or some names, but we can discuss them later going ahead, right? So, going back to the classical world of the Mediterranean, in and around when the dogma of the church was in full force, and people believed that, as per the Bishop Usher in Ireland, that the earth was created as according to the Bible, and it was born on October 23rd, 4004 BC. How did he get this age? He added up all the age. He added up the ages of all the people mentioned in the Bible, and so God created the world in 7 days, and so thereon you get the age of the earth. So that was the church doctrine, and at the same time, to explain whatever else was going on, whatever rock formations was seen across the earth, they used the concept of the biblical flood, Noah's flood. And so it was basically thought that all the rocks were laid down during the Noah's flood. The earliest rocks did not have any life, and then the later ones had fossils. And this was basically taken to be catastrophism, if you remember. And one of the biggest proponents of this was Abraham Werner, and then Georges Cuvier from France and Germany, respectively. And so this is the dominant ideology that was there, that the world was created through some godly force, that it was a single one-off giant event, and then any later shaping of the earth processes, earth surface form, happened as a result of the flood that occurred, and therefore there cannot be a subject as such of geology, because everything is created by God. There is no point in, apart from just analyzing the present day landscape, what is already there, there is no point going back and looking into something else, right? I see people raising their hands. Is there any query? Do I need to answer anything? Hello?
Priyanka, I think it's more out of understanding that just হাত লেগে যাচ্ছে হয়তো।
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে. So next is we come to one of my favorite people, Nicholas Steno. And Steno was not really a stroud believer in the church's teachings, and from him we get the first four concepts or first four laws of stratigraphy. That is superposition, that the lower strata is always older than the younger strata. Cross-cutting relationships. If a strata cuts across another strata, then the first strata is definitely younger than the strata through which it cuts. Then lateral continuity. If there is a large basin, all the strata will be deposited horizontally unless it meets some obstruction during its lateral course of deposition, right? And so these are some of the laws that Steno gave, and these laws started to be followed. And this is the original book that he wrote. And there are two more books about him. One is his collection of his original papers translated into English, and then a novel written about Steno's life. And Steno's impact on geology, he is said to be one of the founding fathers of geology, because without the principles of stratigraphy, you have nothing. You cannot interpret the rock strata that you see around you. And so you forget understanding about fossils, or you forget understanding about how processes and landforms evolve. And that is why his birthday is on January 11th. And so it was his 374th birthday. Google made a special doodle for him, looking at showing the different rock strata and the various cross-cutting and other fossil relationships that he had talked about. Right. So Steno is a very, very important person going ahead into the development of geology. And then the next big figure that comes along is Hutton. Now, Hutton was a product of the Scottish Enlightenment. See, the reason why I will digress a little bit at times from what I'm talking about is that science does not function in, solitary confinement, or a subject does not grow solitarily. It always grows in context with the wider scientific and societal environment of that time, and interactions between people of different branches of science, the societal conditions, whether it is conducive to learning or not. And so Hutton was a product of the Scottish Enlightenment. This was a period in Scottish history when the country had a huge amount, huge level of literacy for all citizens. And then there were major works in literature, in chemistry, in a range of other sciences that were brought out by people working. And he was at the University of Edinburgh. And then he left his studies at the University of Edinburgh because he got into trouble as a student. He went away on his farm for 20 years. And while he was working on his farm, what he saw is every year the rain would come, because Scotland is buffeted by rains from the North Sea, from the Atlantic, from all sides. So every year the rain would come and wash away his topsoil, and he would bring that topsoil back from the canals and dump it on the land again. And again, the next year the rain would come and wash away the topsoil. So what he thought is that, is there some kind of a cycle? Is there some kind of a slow and steady gradual process which leads to the erosion of the landscape, rather than, this one-time giant mass event that has created the entire Earth's surface? So, he starts working on this theory, and then he chances upon a place called Siccar Point. It's to the north of Edinburgh. And he goes there, and what he sees there really opens his eyes, and he takes his friends there later on. And what he sees there, this is the photo of Siccar Point that is there. And what you'll see is that there are two kinds of rocks over here. One is the horizontal rocks. This is a red sandstone. The horizontal rocks that are over here, this is the upper series. And below that, you have the lower series, which is the grey-wack, or let's say the shale rocks that are there, the grey shale rocks that are there. Now, the big idea that Hutton came up with, or the big refutation that Hutton came up with against the proponents of catastrophism and the biblical teachings, was that if all stuff, or if all rocks are deposited during one giant flood, how can you have horizontal rocks and vertical rocks being formed at the same time? That's not possible, right? If all sediments are being deposited, then according to Steno's principles, which were accepted, all rocks must be laid down horizontally at the same time. But here we have lower series vertical rocks, upper series horizontal rocks. That means, what does he say? He says that the lower series must have been deposited as horizontal rocks, stage 1. Then in stage 2, they must have been uplifted and tilted and folded and made vertical. So that's stage 2. In stage 3, they must have again been eroded down to below the water level, below the sea level. So that's stage 3. In stage 4, again, new strata, new red sandstone strata must have been deposited on this eroded down gray shale strata. That is stage 4. And then again in stage 5, the entire landmass has again been uplifted. So 5 stages of formation of this particular landscape, which cannot be explained by one single event, right? So as a result of this, he says that the time given for a Noah's flood event, the time given by a Noah's flood event is just too short for this entire 5-stage process to occur at the same time, right? So as a result, what happens is, we see that he says that the geological time period must be much, much, much longer, right? It must be thousands or millions of years longer. And as a result, what Hutton is given the credit of, he is given the credit of being the man who found time, or rather geological time. So this is a lovely novel written about Hutton's life. And there's a very, very nice series called Men of Rock. It's a beautiful documentary series. It's hosted by one of my favorite geoscientists, Ian Stewart, who is a professor of geoscience communication at Plymouth University. So he explains whole Hutton's life story and theory very nicely. And the place where he is standing, so this is one of the places which is Hutton's field site. And you can see this pink rock, and then you can see this, dull grayish rock. So this is the grayish thing is igneous intrusives, and this pink thing is the limestone that is there, or rather the granite that is there, and then this is the intrusives, the dikes that are there. So obviously, if all the rocks were formed at once, you would not have any intrusives. Intrusives can only occur during multiple phases of creation of rocks. Again, so this is another point that Hutton uses to point out that geological time must be enormous. It has to be enormous for it to explain the processes, for it to explain the rock formations that are being seen. And what this does is this allows people time, right? Time for what? Time to make theories about how the earth may have evolved. That maybe in first 10,000 years this may have happened. Next 10,000 years this may have happened. Then next 50,000 years maybe some erosion. Another 50,000 years maybe some uplift. So by creating this huge timeline, or by creating a concept that the geological timeline could be really, really long, Hutton allows the science of geology to flourish. And therefore he writes that because it is so long, there is no prospect of no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end, or that is what we call the present is the key to the past, and that is the first principle that you study when you take up geomorphology. So that comes from Hutton's work, and I'll later Lyell and Playfair's work also, but mainly from Hutton's work, right? So this is why Hutton is so important in geoscience. And in fact, what you will see is very strangely, the three of the most profound scientists the world has ever seen, they have always worked with time. So you have Hutton in the 17th century, 18th century, and then you have Stephen Hawking in the 20th and 21st century. Again, brief history of time. And in between, you have Einstein, E equals to mc square, again, time and space, time, energy, changes and relativity. So the idea of time is something that has fascinated human beings for a long period. And therefore, by being able to establish that geological time could be really drawn out, it could be really long, Hutton set the stage for others to carry out further research. But of course, Hutton's writings were not that good because he was also in ill health. And so his writings could only be taken ahead by others because a lot of challenge came against his theory, right? So Playfair wrote about it because Playfair was his friend, went with him for much field work. And then after that, there was a gentleman who came along of the next generation called Charles Lyell, again a Scottish. And what Lyell did, the photograph that you see here, this is part of his book, the first frontispiece of his book. The photograph is there of columns of an ancient Roman temple near Naples. And if you see these black marks over here, these black marks over here are marks left by shells or crustaceans, cockles, right? Crabs, oysters, which can only live below the water. So when Lyell sees these, what he thinks is that this is proof that there has been a slow and steady gradual change in the Earth's surface. Why? Because if when the temple was constructed, these marks were not there, then this temple must have sunk down to below the water level. Then these animals would have come and lived along these columns. And then again, the land must have been raised up. So now we have these markings and we can see them along these columns, right? So there is a slow and steady gradual change in the entire Earth's history, which is what Lyell points out. And Lyell was a very good orator, a very good writer, and his Principles of Geology, this book became the textbook for the next 100 years in different universities, right? In fact, there is a website called the Lyell Collection. You can go on that website and you can see a lot of work that is done by Lyell and other people, and that is kept there, right? Now going ahead, then we come to something again very, very important. Using the principles of Hutton, using the principles of, am I not audible? Yes, no? Hello?
Yes, you are audible. I think some people are having.
Fine. Because I'm a little worried about internet connection today. Anyhow, so using the principles of Hutton and using the principles of Steno, next we have someone called William Smith. And what William Smith does is, this is the first geological map of a country that he made. That he made of England, where are all the different rock layers. And this is said to be the map that changed the world. Why? Because in this map, he marked out the various coal belts. And by marking out the various coal belts, think of the time period I'm talking about. He writes this book in the 1760s, 1780s. And 1760 was the birth of the Industrial Revolution. And during the Industrial Revolution, what do you need? You need fuel. You need fuel. You need coal to run your machines, to run your factories, right? To produce even more. And as a result, using this map, people are able to take out the coal very easily. Earlier, they would have to search for it a lot. And this drives the Industrial Revolution in England, that allows England to develop, that allows England to build a strong navy, right? And therefore, that allows England to then go out into the world and colonize the rest of the world. So you can say that that is one map that has really affected not only the geography, geology, but also the geopolitics of the world. And this is very, very important, right? So as a result, what happened is not just geology, because the Industrial Revolution came, now you are mass producing goods in your factories. Now, if you're mass producing goods, you need to transport them to the market, right? Simple economics. Now, if you need to transport them to the market, you need to build roads, you need to build good waterways. So what do you need? You need to understand the physics of slopes. You need to understand the geomorphological processes that are occurring on land surfaces, because you will construct your roads through them. You need to understand the mechanics of river flow, because you will construct your canals and you will use the water for hydropower in your mills. And as a result, directly, I told you that the Industrial Revolution was around 1760, 1770, right? Immediately, you see the formulas that came up. The 1775, the Shazy equation. 1779, the Dubai equation, right? Then Manning's equation, then 100 years later. Hello? Hello? Is it fine?
Yes, sir. Someone unmuted.
Okay, fine. Right. So as a result of this Industrial Revolution, a lot of focus came into the studies of land surface processes, slopes, and your river mechanics, fluid mechanics. And so we have these equations. And, we still use the Manning's equation today. We still use the Shazy equation today, even after so many, almost say 200 years or so, right? Or 150 years or so. Right. So this is a time when the Industrial Revolution drove a lot of geomorphology, because that is what society needed. And again, the Coulomb's law, that is what we use for slope failure studies today. Right. So these things started to come up as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Okay. So what are the twin foundations of geomorphology that we can take? So one is the historical approach, which is what catastrophism versus uniformitarianism, right? So the uniformitarianism are propagated by Hutton and then taken up by Playfair and Lyell. That is the idea that drives geomorphology, because they start to understand how the Earth surface process forms, how the processes change the Earth surface landforms. And the other one is from the area of classical mechanics, studies of soil stress, studies of shear and shear stress, strain, these relationships between by engineers based in continental Europe. So you have two different areas. One is you have the British Isles, they are taking up these classical studies, the historical approach. And then in Europe, you are taking up the mechanical engineering based applications. And it is by a mixture of these two approaches that the science of geomorphology, or the subject of geomorphology, starts to evolve, right? Now, along with this, if you have heard this very common saying that seashells by the seashore, it's a tongue twister. There is another lady that comes up. That is she is Mary Anning, and Mary Anning is given the credit of establishing the field of paleontology. She lived at Lyme Regis in the English coast, and she would go and hunt for fossils, and she would sell those fossils, right? And she basically established the principle, the subject of paleontology. And using her work, people could then go ahead and use fossils to date different strata. So you've heard of something called index fossils, right? Where if you find a certain kind of fossil, it gives a certain date to the rock layer in which you are finding. So a Jurassic fossil will mean that you're getting it from a Jurassic rock layer, right? And the reason why Mary Anning is so important is because she is one of the foremost pioneers in paleontology, and that helps to establish and drive forward the study of geology, which again helps geomorphology. Along with that, later this year, there is going to be a movie released on her life called Ammonite. And you'll have Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan acting in that. So be sure to catch this movie. It will, profile Mary Anning's life, right? So this is something to watch out for, right? Then what happens is, as these discoveries come up, the geological time scale starts to develop. So you start off with the earliest one, that is by Arduino, 1759. Then Werner comes and he says volcanic series, that is the crystalline rocks. The transported series, that is the alluvial rocks. Then the primitive series, that is the basal crystalline. The volcanics are right on top, that is the youngest. Then Lyell comes, right? Lyell, according to the principles of uniformitarianism, adds something more to the geological time scale, names certain of the eras and epochs. And finally, this progresses with more and more developments, with more and more discovery. And then we have the ICS, International Commission for Stratigraphy. They have prepared the present day geological time scale that we have. This is 2004, and it has been developed further till today, right? And so again, what happens is, part of the history of geology is the naming of the geological eras. So as a student, if you're studying these things, you need to know where these names come from. For example, say Devonian. Devonian strata means this time period or era was decided by looking at the rocks that were there in the county of Devonshire in England, right? Permian means these rocks were named from by studying the rocks that are there near the city of Perm in Russia. Incidentally, Perm is also a city where you get a beautiful hairstyle for women. That is why it's called a Perm, right? And then you have Jurassic. Jurassic comes from the Jura Mountains in Switzerland. Then Triassic. Triassic basically means that the trias, three different rock units that are there together. That comes from southern Germany. So these are very, very nice trivia to know, and these are also useful for various competitive exams. If you're studying the geological time scale, you can see the timeline that is given as these strata were named. And so what I'm trying to impress on you is that this is not a one-time. Framing of the geological time scale was not a one-time event. It took 50, 60, 70 years, right, to slowly discover fossils, study the terrain, and name the epochs and eras, right? Then, we come to another person called Darwin. And so you could ask me that, why have you put Darwin over here? Because Darwin doesn't really do geomorphology, does it? It's fine that Darwin has a theory of coral reefs, which is the subsidence theory of coral reef formation, that corals are built up along as a barrier, as a fringing reef, then you have a barrier reef, and rather, I think a barrier reef, then fringing reef, and then you have atoll, right? But I'm not talking just about Darwin's contributions in this marine geology or rather coral reef studies. I'm talking about evolution. And why is important? Why is it important that we study Darwin's evolution? Because Darwin gets the idea for his evolution partly from Hutton's work. Right? This has largely gone unacknowledged. Why? Because see, Darwin was a product of, he studied for a while in Edinburgh, but he was basically a product of the current thinking at that time that the Earth's time period is very, very short. Right? It was created by catastrophist forces. It was out of Noah's flood and all that. So the geological time period of the Earth is very, very short. It's very, very brief. And what problems does it create? If the time period is very, very brief, then can you really allow time for evolution? Because evolution is a very, very slow process. It will take a few generations for a certain characteristic to change, which is what Darwin saw through his studies of the finches in the Galapagos Islands. But while he journeys on his ship, the Beagle, around the Galapagos Islands, he carries with him Lyell's Principles of Geology. He carries that textbook with him. And he reads it during his journey. And suddenly he realizes that, in fact, geological time period could be really vast. And the vastness of the geological time period, as proposed by Lyell, as proposed by Hutton before him, allows Darwin that space to frame the concept or to frame the idea of evolution. Because evolution is not something that can happen overnight. You need a million-year timeline for evolution to take place, right? So Darwin gains a lot from the works of Lyell and Playfair and Hutton. And also as a result of Darwin's work, something else happens. Because suddenly when Darwin's theory becomes established, evolution is the hot topic of the day. Everybody wants to do evolution, right? And therefore, once Darwin establishes his theory, when was it? It was, I think, in 1858, 1860. Immediately after that, in the next 20, 30 years, you see William Morris Davies come up with his idea of the geographical cycle. that is the evolution, right? So because, see, so what happens is Darwin gains from Hutton and Playfair, and Davis gains from Darwin, right? So this is how science progresses. That is why I'm showing you this timeline. That again, geomorphology or any science does not progress in isolation. You need a certain cultural milieu. That in Europe you have the Renaissance, then you have the scientific revolution, you have the discoveries by Descartes, Newton, okay, Bernoulli and Lavoisier in chemistry. Then Darwin comes along, and then you have Curie, right? Pierre and Marie Curie, who come along, who give the ideas of radioactivity, and that allows geology to go ahead even further. Because using the concept of radioactivity, you could actually predict the decay rate of heat inside the Earth, because the Earth contains radioactive materials like uranium, and that allows you to do dating and get a much, much better age timeline of the Earth, right? Which is what we will see later on going ahead. And again, political events are very, very important. Why? Because, see, it starts off with the American Revolution. And the American Revolution, what does it do? The American Revolution in 1776, I think, it frees the US from the British Dominion. And so the United States is suddenly an independent country, the original 13 states. And now it wants to discover the rest of the territory, right? It wants to map the rest of the territory. So the United States, the White House, rather the president at that time, he starts to give a lot of funds to geomorphological and geological studies. And so you have the geological societies coming up in that part of the world, and you have people like Davis coming up eventually to carry forward these works, right? I'll go into that later. So politics is very, very important. Again, at the same time, you have the British Raj, right, in India, that is there. And so the discoveries made in India, we will see later how they allow geology to progress, how they allow geomorphology to progress later on, right? So we will see that. So anyhow, what I'm trying to say is that through Darwin, others get influenced, and suddenly you have this whole group of people who want to do cyclical processes, landscape evolution in geomorphology, and that is how it goes ahead, right? Okay. So increasingly what we find is some points so far that increasingly the catastrophist ideas are nullified, the uniformitarianism ideas are adopted, right? Then we had the prominent role of climate change in causing earth landform changes, landscape changes is also being acknowledged, right? And then especially after the American Civil War in the US, what happens is it becomes a free country, and newer researches start to get taken up in that part of the world, right? And it is around this time, towards the end of this time, in the middle of the around 1848, that the first textbook on physical geography is published. It was done by a lady called Mary Somerville, and she publishes this textbook, and it remained a textbook to be taught in colleges and universities for over the next 150 years. That was the impact of the textbook. The first textbook in English that dealt with physical geography was given by a lady called Mary Somerville. She was given the Victoria Medal, or later it was called the Founders Medal, by the Royal Geographical Society in London as a mark of her achievement. And to mark this great achievement, earlier this year, February 2nd was her birthday. So earlier this year, Google also made a doodle for to commemorate Mary Somerville's great achievements, right? So women have contributed a lot throughout this progression of the geosciences, right? We will see about that later going ahead, right? So apart from this, so then we come into Europe, that is British Isles and Western Europe. We'll go into Eastern Europe, Russia a little bit later. So what happens then in Western Europe is these people start to come up and they start to work. So Louis Agassiz, right, who works with his friend Charpentier and then starts to work independently. Louis Agassiz means glacial cycles, studying of the glacial cycles in the Alps. Then you have Richthofen, who takes up desert studies. Dana, who takes up coral reefs. Dematon, who takes up fluvial morphometry, the first person possibly to undertake fluvial morphometry studies, which we still do today. Johann Sivicic, weathering and karst topography studies. And then in 1909, you have Eduard Suez, who gives the first concept or a three-layered structure of the Earth, that is Sayal, Saima, and Muffe. So these are the progressions that keep on happening in Europe along this time, right? As the science gets more and more established. And then to India. So I told you that we had the British Raj over here at that point of time. So in India, what did we have? We had a gentleman called Colonel Lambton, and he decided he wanted to map the country, right? And this mapping of the country happened. Why? Because the Britishers needed roads. They needed proper roads to connect their coal mines with their ports. They needed proper roads to allow their armies to march and subdue rebellions. So he said that we need to undertake an entire survey of the whole country. And so the greatest scientific endeavor in history starts. It starts early in the 1800s, I think 1802, and it starts from Chennai, from the Madras beach. Colonel Lambton starts it. He continues. He dies during it. It gets taken up by this gentleman on the right, George Everest. Right, and you will have seen such survey towers. If you go to Dum Dum, Chiriamore, I think Barrackpore, these survey towers are still there. GTS towers are still there, on top of which they would keep the instrument and do the surveys. Sorry. On top of which they would keep the instruments and do the surveys. And on there where, we have these GTS markers. These are our benchmarks. It is on this thing that the entire topographical map and contours that you use of our country, they depend on, right? And the Britishers were not alone. A lot of Indians were involved in this. Many of them have never been really acknowledged. That again is the colonial tendency towards the people they ruled. But two people that were really acknowledged were, and stamps were brought out in their honor. On the left is Pandit Nain Singh Rawat, pioneering surveys he did in the Himalayas, right? And that time, surveying the Himalayas and the Tibetan kingdom was very, very dangerous, because if they caught an outsider, they would instantly execute them. Because there was always the fear that once your country gets surveyed, then the opposing army could come and invade, because they know where all the things are. And this was part of what is called the Great Game between the British Empire and the Soviet Empire. I will not say Soviet, I will say the Russian Tsar or the Russian Empire at that point of time. The control of Central Asia, the control of Kashmir, Afghanistan, that area, right? That has historically always been a place of contention, right? From the time of Alexander, even till today, you are seeing the issues that are going on over there. So Nain Singh Rawat, he surveyed the entirety of Tibet. And how did he do his surveys? He could not be seen to map anything, right? Otherwise, he would be executed. So they were trained to walk in a certain manner, that every step they take, the spacing of the step would be the same. And he would pose as a Buddhist monk. He would carry a rosary, that is mala, in his hand, and he would count the beads on the rosary and measure the distances. And within his prayer wheel, he would conceal various small instruments for pressure and temperature, and so make a timeline and make a geographical of the journey. And on the right is Radhanath Shikdar. Radhanath Shikdar was a product of my college, Hindu college, now Presidency College University. And Radhanath Shikdar is treated with finding out the height of Mount Everest, the first person to calculate the height of Mount Everest, right? So these are some huge accomplishments. Now, why did I go to the GTS? The reason for that is, these are the instruments that they used. And if you look at the Great Arc by John Key or Matthew Edney, Mapping an Empire, you can read more about this, right? These are the instruments they used. This is the first map of Everest that they had, right? The triangulation survey that they did. And this is the first topo sheet that was prepared of Everest. It was brought out, I think, in 1910 or 1920, right? The reason for it is during that survey, they came upon what is known as the Kalyanpur and Kalyana problem, where the plumb bob would not align. And it is from that problem that we have our first ideas, or I will say the confirmatory ideas of isostasy, right? There were some earlier studies done on gravity anomalies that were done by Pierre Bouguer in the Chimborazo Peak in Ecuador, right? And that is why it is named after him, the Bouguer anomaly. And again, this was part of the larger geopolitics of that time, because Pierre Bouguer was French, and obviously your Everest and Lambton, they were English. So this was again part of the tussle for supremacy between the English Empire and the French Empire. You will recall that even in India, the British Empire was only founded by the East India Company after Robert Clive defeated Dupleix at 3 battles, the 3 Carnatic battles, right? He defeated them in South India. Then he was able to establish the British stronghold in India. So this was part of the tussle that was going on between England and France. And this was a scientific tussle, because the biggest scientific question of the day was, what is the shape of the Earth? Right? And it's a very, very fundamental question. A child can ask you this question: what is the shape of the Earth? How large is the Earth? And you could not answer this question unless you measured one arc of longitude fully or for a substantial length, right? So the French wanted to measure it, and so they went to the Andes Mountains, and the British wanted to measure it, so they started to measure in India, which was their dominion. And out of this came the ideas of isostasy. And isostasy was the term was coined by Clarence Dutton, American geologist, and in his 1890 lecture to the American Society on some of the greater problems of physical geology, right? And the reason why this is important is these ideas, the ideas of Steno, the ideas of Houghton, Darwin, evolution, isostasy will be used later when we look at continental drift and plate tectonics. So that is how the science evolves over time, right? So going back to the American independence, once the country becomes free, then two pioneers, Lewis and Clark, they took the first pioneering surveys going west along the Mississippi, the first two people to reach the Pacific coast, right? And or rather, the first two Americans to reach the Pacific coast, right? After the Spanish had done so, and then the army topographers they started to survey the land. Now, this text is taken from a book called Treatise on Geomorphology, edited by Schroeder, from the first volume. The first volume, there are 24 volumes, 14 volumes, each dealing with different parts of geomorphology. One is fluvial, one is glacial, one is coastal, so on. This is from the first volume. So if you obtain that, you can read through this. I'll just skip. And at the same time, something happened. On 13 January 1888, in the Cosmos Club, 30 scientists from different Earth science branches are gathered, and they formed what is the National Geographic Society. And this was the first magazine, that was the first issue of National Geographic. That is how it looked, 1888. And amazingly, the first article in National Geographic was written by William Morris Davis on geographic methods in geological investigation. Today, the National Geographic has a totally different character. It's much more about photographs and tourist aspects, right? But it started out as a core geography and geology, earth science based outlet. And the second one was by McGee, talking about the classification of geographic forms by Genesis, that is classification of landforms, right, based on their process of formation. Okay, so this once the National Geographic Society formed, more funds are available for research, and this carried on. And so as a result, you have a huge, number of geologists coming into this domain. And so these were the pioneer geologists who were there, and they became enmeshed in what is known as a cycle mania. Again, outfall of the Darwin effect, right? As a result of the Darwinian effect, everybody wanted to look at cycles and evolution. So the three people who are here, right? One is Archibald Geikie. This in the middle is John Wellesley Powell, sorry. And on the extreme right, you have Walcott, right? And Powell is very, very important. I'll come back to him later. This is William Morris Davis here. This is McGee. Okay, he studied pediments, defined them. Below, first one is Gilbert, right? Grove Carl Gilbert, the great concept. Then you have, this is, I forget who this is. It will come to me later on. And then this is Penck, right? So Davis and Penck, the two old rivals who are there. Okay, their cycle. Oh yeah, this is King, Lester Charles King. So Davis, Penck, King, those three theories that you read about, these are these three gentlemen, right? And so the reason I'll focus on three individuals out of these. So these are the geomorphic cycles that you have read, because everybody became cycle mad, evolution mad, youth, mature, old, that stage. Among these, one person I admire the most is John Wellesley Powell. He did not have one hand because he lost that hand fighting in the American Civil War, right? That happened a few decades earlier. And even then, he commanded an expedition and was the first man to travel the entire length of the Colorado River, traversed through the Grand Canyon. And through that, he got his concepts and ideas of base level of erosion, right? He gave that concept, and that journey has been repeated again in a documentary called Operation Grand Canyon. It's available on the BBC website. You can go and see. And 2021 marks the 150th year or anniversary of Powell's journeys. And so as a result of that, they are doing a sesquicentennial journey of the Colorado River again. And so these are the two books that have been written on John Wellesley Powell. Please go through them. You will learn more about his Colorado journeys, right? It's a fascinating account. They lost a lot of people to Red Indians because fighting was going on at that time. They lost a lot of people to hunger and disease, but they carried on with their work, right? Then the next huge person that comes up is your G.K. Gilbert. Am I audible? Yes, so far?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you. So the next important person that comes up is G.K. Gilbert. And Gilbert is very, very important, not just for his own work, but because Gilbert basically teaches W.M. Davis. Some of the first field works that Davis does is with Grove Carl Gilbert. And two of Gilbert's important publications are the Geology of the Henry Mountains. So how a mountain can evolve from a gently folded uplifted strata. This is one of his major publications. And then the past shorelines of the Lake Bonneville. That is to show that, again, a slow uplift has taken place and how former shorelines are now stratified in the various rock layers. Two of Gilbert's huge works. And the other one, Gilbert also made one of the first flumes. Flume means an artificial river channel. So Gilbert in 1904, he designed an artificial flume to study mining effects for hydraulic mining. That is, if I create a dam on a river, because they were thinking of damming the Colorado River, which eventually happened with the Hoover Dam and other dams. So I create a dam on the river, I create something called a hungry water effect. Because the water that I release downstream, that water will be bereft of sediments because the sediment has been deposited upstream of the dam. So the water going downstream is underloaded. That means it is free of the sediment. So what will the water do? It will now pick up new sediment by drilling down into the bed of the river. This is called hydraulic mining. So Gilbert was one of the first people to study hydraulic mining ever. And in Geomorphology, the journal, there is a tribute made to Gilbert's work as a result of that study, right? And then we come to the possibly the defining figure of that age, William Morris Davis. And so he talks about stages of evolution. So below you can see stages of Davis's evolution, right? His youth, his mature, and his old stage, right? So what happens to landscapes happens to us all. And there are 4 volumes published by Cholle and others. They are called the History of the Study of Landforms or the Development of Geomorphology. So volume 1 deals with the time period before Davis. Volume 2 is devoted entirely to Davis. Volume 3, I'll show you, talks about the around 1890 to 1950. So contemporary to Davis and just after Davis. And then volume 4, I think, has just been released recently, a while ago. So that talks about the next phase of research that has happened. So in volume 2, Davis outlined, in volume 2, Cholle and all have outlined the various works Davis has done, right? But towards the end, I would rather focus on the criticisms. Why? Because today many geomorphologists blame Davis for retarding the work of geomorphology, or retarding the study of geomorphology. Why? Because they feel that following Davisian principles, almost everybody became cycle mad, right? Everybody became evolution mad. And the only thing that mattered in geomorphology was youth, mature, old. So you would have a arid cycle of geomorphology, you would have a karst cycle of geomorphology, you would have a marine cycle of geomorphology, right? Coastal cycle. Only cycles. And many people say that that stopped actual scientific studies, that stopped measurements and mechanical or modeling based studies of the landscape, because Davis never really did these. He never really did any mathematical based studies. That was Gilbert. That's why many people consider Gilbert's achievements to have been greater, right? Because he actually physically modeled stuff, right? But anyhow, that was Davis's contribution. And as Thornberry said, it cannot be denied that Davis's reach through geomorphology is still felt and will always be felt as long as we undertake such studies, right? Anyhow, so again, looking at a timeline, this is not very clear, but this is where we are going up to the year 2000. After Davis, you come up with the other people who take up the cyclical studies, and then the society starts to change. And we'll see that why, because so these are the cyclical studies, right? Cycle based. So peniplanation after Davis, pediplane after King, H plane after Budel. Then you have your Endramf after Penck. So everybody starts to do cyclical studies and analysis, right? This is what starts to happen. This is the Davisian effect, right? And then volume 3 deals with the developments that happened. These are the contents of the book. So it deals with the developments that happened all around Davis during 1890 to 1950? What were the works being done in other parts of the world? What was the effect of Davis's research that was felt in other parts of the world? So these were some of the main people that were there. Not all of them agreed with Davis. This is Woolridge. You have read Woolridge and Morgan's seminal textbook, right? Physical basis of geomorphology, geomorphology, the physical basis of geography, right? Then you have De Geer, that is De Geer and Rogen-Morens in glacial geomorphology. Johann Civicic, that is Cart's cycle of geomorphology. Andrew Cotton. Cotton, I think, is considered to be the pioneer geomorphologist in New Zealand, right? His books are still available. Then Siegfried Passage, I'll show you some of Passage's work. And then Dokuschev, one of the most important, after Glinka, one of the most important Russian geomorphologists. And he was a very fierce critic of Davis. And Dokushev's work in soil geomorphology and other such areas are very, very similar. Right? So these are things that happened at that time. I talked about Passage. The important why? Because one of the first persons to do a regional classification of landforms based on genesis type. That is one of the first people to classify into endogenous landforms, exogenous landforms. And again, on the basis of folded, faulted, intrusive landforms, or in exogenous landforms on the basis of fluvial, glacier, aeolian, that's classifications, right? So after many others have done after Passage, but his is seminal work because one of the first people to undertake such regional genetic classification of landforms, right? And then two people, Eduard Bruckner and Albert Penck. This Penck is not Walter Penck. Walter Penck was the son. Albert Penck was his father. And Albert Penck was a climatologist, meteorologist. And so with Bruckner, Penck, together, they studied the warm and cold glacier and interglacial phases in the Alps and other parts of the world. They even went to Peru, studied the Andes. And so it is from part of their work that we have Gunzmittelrisurm, the glacial and interglacial cycles that are there. And of course, others have built up on this as a result, right? And as a result of such focus on climatology, this is Jean Tricas. And as a result of such work, there came the branch of climatic geomorphology. Or if you have studied the diagrams of Tricas and then Peltier, right? How relative humidity and temperature can condition various geomorphic processes, which part of the world what will occur. And then the similar work done by Budel showing the morphoclimatic zonation of the world landscapes, right? Which kind of geomorphic process is most active in which part of the world. So this was the rise of climatic geomorphology. This is still done. This is still practice going ahead, right? And this came up during the 1920s to 1940s, right? Now, if you want to, I'm going through very quickly because we have a limited time constraint. I cannot cover everything. But if you want to read much more about this from all the way from Hutton to Hack, that is till so far I have spoken, right? From the beginning. So the Tinkler's book is seminal, one of the first books to deal with the history of geomorphology. So that is something that you can look into. Then another book that talks about the history of geomorphology and quaternary geology. These talk about individual people. You can look at the people who are, who have written and the topics that are there. So if you get hold of this book, you can go through this book and get more about the history of the subject, right? And then something else happens. Now we are moving really away because we are moving into an entirely different domain. Because something happens in the United States in the 1920s and 1930s. The Mississippi floods, and these are bad floods, right? A lot of the landscape is swamped. A lot, just like if you remember the Katrina hurricane, right, and the effect that it had on New Orleans. So the Mississippi floods, and so what the USDA, the United States, the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, what they decide is that we must start to control this river, right? So already this is Gilbert's Flume in the Appalachian Mountains, I think. No, this is in Berkeley, California, University of Berkeley in California. This is Gilbert's Flume that he has already made. So the USGS decides that we need more mechanical based studies. We need to tame the river because we cannot allow the river to flood. We must control the floods in the river, and we must, utilize it for irrigation, utilize it for development purposes. And there are two beautiful books written on this: John McPhee, The Control of Nature, and Rising Tide by J.M. Barrie. Right? So how the flood was controlled, and as a result of this, how hydraulic studies came up in geomorphology. Alongside that, you had Bagnold, who took up studies of saltating sand grains, physics of wind-blown sand. Those studies came up. And as a result of this, geomorphology starts to get more and more quantified, right? So the huge shift from the description based analysis of Davis and the cyclical proponents to the quantitative based analysis of people from the engineering branches, people from the mechanical mindset, right? So Jackson starts with the stream ordering, then we come down to the Strahler, Houghton and Strahler schemes that we still follow till today. And what we have is we have a landscape organization system that starts to come up. Landscape classification, landscape organization. This forms the basis of the geomorphological mapping units that is taken on later ahead, right? And so as one big product of this, if we just go ahead a few years, one big product of this is the first, you can say, quantitative work in geomorphology, or from where we can say that quantitative fluvial geomorphology starts, that is fluvial processes in geomorphology by Leopold Woolman and Miller, right? And you must, this book came out in 1964, and you must remember that at the same time, around that time, if you remember geographical thought, we had the quantitative revolution. So that was a phase of quantification, numericals. So that impacted on geomorphology, and so this approaches started to be adopted, right? But between the stopping of Davis, let's say 1910, and between this 1960 or 1950, the starting of all the mathematical theories and everything in geomorphology, something very, very important happens, right? And my next favorite person, so we have Alfred Wegener. On the other side, you have James Kroll and Milutin Milankovitch. Milankovitch, of course, you will know for the Milankovitch cycles, that the ellipticity and the obliquity of the Earth's orbit, which allows the Earth to wobble a bit as it goes around the sun. That allows ice ages to come because the Earth is a little bit away from the sun, so it receives a little bit less radiation. It's a little bit colder, so ice ages can come. But Wegener, and see the term that we are now using, forcing, climatic forcing, tectonic forcing. Where does this come from? It basically comes from the work of Wegener and Milankovitch. So what about Wegener? One of the foremost geoscientists that has ever been, possibly the greatest of them all, right? I will not talk about Wegener a lot because you have studied Wegener in your courses. This is Wegener's original book, Die Anstrengung der Kontinent und Ozean, in German. This is the English translation. This is the 4th edition of the translation, right? Please remember that the original theory came out as a paper in 1912. Then it came out as a book in 1914. Then there were 3 more editions, right? This is the 3rd or the 4th edition of the book. And Wegener was writing the next edition when he eventually passed away. This is his wife. The reason why I show this is Wegener's wife, Else, was the daughter of Vladimir Köppen, right? So Köppen's climatic classification you have studied about. Köppen was Wegener's father-in-law, right? And so they would do a lot of work together. And this is the last photograph that we have of Wegener on the side, right? This is the last photograph of Wegener that we have as he goes with his guide into the Arctic, and they never find him again. This is his grave that was marked on the ice, right, where they found his body. And we don't know where he is today because the ice has melted and he has continental drifted away, right? So we don't know where Wegener is today. But this is the seminal impact that he has left in the geosciences, right? Because based on his work, these people build. So you have Holmes and Harry Hess, and you have Blackett. But what does Blackett do? Blackett discovers paleomagnetism, the paleomagnetic properties of rocks. Then you have Wine, the mirrored strips or the parallel alternate normal magnetism and reverse magnetism strips. And then you have J. Tuzo Wilson, who coins the term plate. So from the work of Wegener, you have the concept of tectonics that comes up all the way, right? And in this part, if you really want to read more about this, because this is fascinating, because the reason is Wegener faced a lot of opposition. Why? Because think of the time, 1914, 1912, 1914, 1920, his books are coming out. And that is a time when the English-speaking world, the Anglophone world, US and Britain, they are at war. The First World War has happened with Germany. You are leading up to the Second World War. And so if you have earth-changing theories or science-changing theories being given by a German, there is going to be a lot of opposition, right? So there's a lot of politics to it also. If you want to read about the entire controversy, Henry Frankel has written 4 brilliant books on the continental drift hypothesis. First one is on Wegener himself and the early part, then the discovery of paleomagnetism, how it confirms continental drift, then just about seafloor spreading, how that was determined, and finally how all these three things come together and go into plate tectonics, right? Frankel's books are amazing. You should have a look through definitely. And then a very, very nice book by Naomi Oreskes called Plate Tectonics and Insider's History. What does this book contain? It contains the first-hand accounts of people who are going into the research areas on ships to take samples from the ocean floor, to drill into the ocean sediments, their stories that are there, right? And there's this lady over here, one of the foremost persons in geoscience. Her name is Mary Tharp. And the reason why I show her is she hand drew, she is the first person to establish the discipline of marine cartography, and she hand drew the first marine charts. So you see all the ridges, all the seafloor ridges and rather mid-oceanic ridges that you have seen. These are all hand drawn by Mary Tharp, right? And when she was one of the first people to come up with this idea of a rift, but people dismissed her because science can be very sexist at times also. There's a lot of gender disparity in the sciences also. And so people dismissed her, but eventually it took 20 years, but her work was then properly acknowledged. There are two beautiful books about her. One is called Ocean Speaks and one is called Sounding. If you are more interested in the life of Mary Tharp, you can go ahead and read these two books, right? And then we go ahead a little earlier. We go ahead a little further into something called the neo-catastrophist phase. Why? Because we had the earlier catastrophist phase, then we had uniformitarianism that was established by Hutton and his followers, and then taken further ahead by Davis. All evolution basically comes from uniformitarianism. But then comes Alvarez and Alvarez, father and son, right? Lewis and Walter. And what they do is they discovered a layer of iridium. Now, iridium is, it is of extraterrestrial origin. The Earth doesn't make it, right? So it basically comes from comets or meteorites, rather, meteorites, I would say. And so they discover a thin band of iridium right along the unconformity where there is a KT boundary. KT means the Cretaceous and Tertiary boundary. So along that zone, there is a thin band of iridium, and they date it, right? And it is deposited all over the world at about 65 million years ago. And why is this date very, very significant? This date is significant. Why? Because before this date, older than 65 million years, in rocks that are older than 65 million years, you get dinosaur fossils. After 65 million years, you don't have any dinosaur fossils. So they came up with the idea that a giant meteorite would have hit the Earth, and that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. They pinpointed the area as a Shikshak Club crater that is in the Gulf of Mexico in the Yucatan Peninsula. And that is the area where they thought that this is where the meteorite has come and hit. And Walter Alvarez wrote a book on the T-Rex and the Crater of Doom, possibly following Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, that cinema's catchy title. So T-Rex and the Crater of Doom. So how the extinction of the dinosaurs happened and most improbable journey. And so what this does is, this is the team that wrote. This is the 4-member team that wrote that seminal paper. And so what this paper does, or what their studies does, is it establishes something called neo-catastrophism. That the Earth does not only evolve by slow and gradual process. There are large events. There are mega floods. There are huge volcanic eruptions. There are huge impact meteorite events, right? And so we see a rise of the catastrophists again, but in a different form. And today we still have debates. Are the large events more responsible for, creating the Earth's major features, or is it the slow and steady processes that are more responsible for creating the Earth's major features? Which is true, right? So this is a debate that still goes on: catastrophism versus neo-catastrophism. The works of Leclerc, works of Laplace versus the works of Gretiner, right? So if you are interested, you can read more about these aspects. So again, from the 1950s onwards, we have the discipline of neo-catastrophism that comes, or the thought process of neo-catastrophism that comes up. That, yes, maybe the Earth mostly evolves through slow and steady processes as given by Hutton and Playfair and Lyell, as mainly shown by Davis and Penck in their cycles, but there are large events. And in these large events, a lot of the geomorphic work may be done, which is not possible by the slow and steady processes. For example, if you look at our climatic regime, the entire work done by the rivers in India mainly occurred during the monsoon season, 2 months. During 2 months, the river does almost all the geomorphic work, right? During the big flood season. Rest of the time, there is hardly water in most of the rivers. So there are many neo-catastrophists amongst us today. The cycle concept doesn't really hold for them because they think more in terms of dynamic equilibrium, the Hacks principle, those ideas, or in fact without any cyclical aspect, that neo-catastrophist forces shape the Earth's surface, right? And along with this, along with Alvarez's ideas, we next come to another big idea, another catastrophist idea, that is a snowball Earth hypothesis, which is given by Daniel Schrag and Paul Hoffman from Harvard University. Their idea is that the entire Earth froze, became one giant snowball. That basically occurred because all the continents broke up and drifted far away. Giant mountains came up, and the Earth started producing cyanobacteria. And the cyanobacteria took away most of the carbon dioxide, gave in oxygen. That is called the Great Oxygenation Event. And that caused the Earth to cool down, because if you are taking away carbon dioxide, you are leading to a loss of the greenhouse gas, right? And then finally, the entire Earth got covered as a snowball. You can read Gabriel Walker's beautiful book on it. And then finally, we came out of this snowball as a result of volcanic eruptions that pumped up carbon dioxide and methane through the ice into the atmosphere, which again slowly raised the temperature, right? So again, a major catastrophist theory. So today we are in the realm of neo-catastrophism also. Rather than uniformitarianism, slow and steady changes, neo-catastrophism principles are also there, right? And so again, coming back to what I was talking about, climate forcing, tectonic forcing, one of the fundamental questions that geomorphologists, geoscientists ask themselves today is the Earth mainly shaped by tectonic forces, or is the Earth mainly shaped by climatic forces, right? And what happens is, see the difference, no longer diagrams, rather boxes and arrows. Therefore, what we are talking about is algorithms. What we are talking about is flowcharts. Therefore, the systems, the rise of the systems approach in geomorphology, that comes with the rise of the quantitative revolution, that comes during the 1960s and 70s, right? And one big event happens. Already we had the air photos taken during the First World War. Then we had the Corona satellite that went up and took photographs. But in the 1970s, 1972, the first Landsat satellite is launched, and that changes geoscience forever. Because after that, continuously we have had new satellites going up. Remote sensing has come into geomorphology majorly. GIS has come up, and the entire science has changed from the technical perspective, not necessarily from the theoretical perspective, right? We will look into that, right? If I just list some of the main events from the 1960s onwards, first is Cholle's introduction of a systems approach. We will have, right? We will look into that a little bit. Then Budal's idea of climatic geomorphology, Leopold Wulmans-Miller's book, Schum's hypothesis, right? Earth surface process landforms, that journal coming up. 1981, Summerfield integrating geology and geotectonics and geomorphology together in his seminal book, right? So these are the things that come up as a result, right? Okay. So the book that we are talking about is this Physical Geography, a Systems Approach by Cholle and Kennedy, and the Composite Nature of Physical Geography. So the systems approach starts coming up, and that is there till today. Why? Because we start to see geomorphic landscapes, geomorphic processes as systems, as either morphological systems, cascading systems, process response systems, and so we start to do measurements. So you have studied about black box, white box, gray box, all of those things start to come from this book, right? So more such events, right? So International Association of Geomorphologists, IAG, is founded. Then Geomorphology, the journal, starts publishing. Then we have then post 2000 we have LIDAR, light detection and ranging, that starts to come up. And then in 2004 we have Cosmo isotope dating, right? So the next part of geomorphology basically goes into the whole concept of dates and rates. So far what have we seen? What are the dominant ideas that are relevant? One is morphology, the simple description of the landscape. One is climatic geomorphology, right? Morphology based on climatic analysis, right? Can I be heard? Yes. Hello, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I'll take a little bit more time, sorry. Then process geomorphology, measurement of processes. Then today we have engineering geomorphology and applied geomorphology, right? We will look into that one because application-based science is the need of the hour, right? That is where the thoughts, new lines of geomorphic thoughts have gone. So what are the essential ingredients of geomorphological study now? Landscape dynamics, driving mechanism, that is forcing. Is it climate? Is it tectonics? Is it gravity? Time averaged? Are the processes fast or are they slow? Are they spatially distributed or are they concentrated? How do we scale them according to time? Right? Brunsden has a book, Geomorphology and Time. Then there is another book by Dulcamp and King regarding geomorphological rates. Right? So all these books are available. I have not been able to list all the books. And so there are so many now subdisciplines of study in geomorphology today. Right? Okay. So therefore, what has happened is as geomorphology has grown, as the subject has grown, others we have borrowed from others and others have borrowed from us. So these are the subjects that we now interact with geophysics regarding, say, soil physics or rock mechanics, sedimentology, geochemistry, biology. I'll show you some things on that later on. And of course, with space science and remote sensing. So they borrow from us and we borrow from them. And that is how the science progresses, right? And so taking all this together, you have studied this, Thornbury's 10 principles, right? So I won't really dwell on this. But why stop just at Thornbury's 10 principles? Because if you look at this paper by Gregory and Lewin in Progress in Physical Geography, one of the most important journals that we have, they list other concepts that are there also. So before Thornbury in 1954, there are 50 canons or laws given by King, Lester Charles King in 1953. Then Pitti, 1971, some postulates. Schum, 4 ideas. McCullough, his book, Modern Concepts in Geomorphology, a very, very good book for students. You can have a look at it. Then Coates, 1981, another 10 concepts. Cholle, 2 more concepts. Selby, 1985, in his book, that is, I think it's called Earth's Changing Surface. Okay, so there another few concepts. Graph, another concepts, right? Okay, and then we have the new 10 concepts by Brunsden that come up in 1990. And the reason why I show this separately is this is very, very important. Because if I go back, we have all studied Thornbury's concepts, right? But you won't find the term tectonics anywhere in Thornbury's 10 concepts. The reason for it is, Thornbury wrote this in 1950s. Tectonics was still not there, right? So as a result, how can he put it into his ideas? But if you see Brunsden's concept, it says that, just a second, it says that landscapes are shaped. Is it visible? Yes, no? I just got interrupted. Hello, is it visible?
Yes, yes.
Right. So Brunsden 10 concepts. The first one he says is landforms are shaped by tectonic and denudation processes, right? So the first concept itself has tectonics inside it. Okay. So then proposition number 3, the lower boundary conditions are set by varying sea levels. Again, by acknowledging tectonics, by acknowledging isostasy, the rise and fall of the sea levels and climate change. So we are incorporating 3 big concepts together: tectonics, isostasy, and climate change. All right. So these are the things that integrate together. That's why Brunsden 10 concepts are very, very important to be updated. We should read them. Then again, Schum's beautiful book, To Interpret the Earth, 10 Ways to Be Wrong. What are the 10 mistakes that we can do? These are the 10 ways in which wrong interpretations can happen. This is something that's very, very important. And so what does he tell or others tell geoscientists? That how should you look at a particular landscape? Look up first, right? See what area you are looking at. What is the width and length of the area? Then look back in time. Think of the climate changes that has happened in this part of the world. Then look down. That is, look around how much the space you are covering. Look down. What are the micro features that you are seeing? And then take it all together and look ahead. Right? This is one way to study a landscape. Right? And so the recent 10 concepts, or why we should study geomorphology, that is given by the British Society for Geomorphology. And they have a lovely, I've given 2 websites. They have a lovely thing called Debates in Geomorphology, where if you go to Twitter, and you should join Twitter and load the, go to the BSG Geomorphology, British Society for Geomorphology Twitter handle, and they have Debates in Geomorphology, where they ask very, very fundamental questions and other scientists write in and tweet in, and there's a very, very engaging conversation. According to them, these are the 4 main debates that are going on. How do a landscape change? Is it tectonics or is it climate? That is the main driver, right? Can our understanding of Earth landscapes help us understand Martian or Jupiter or other landscapes? Someday we are thinking, already we are doing a lot of studies on Mars, right? Someday we hope to colonize. So, what can planetary geomorphology help us in? How can Earth help us in understanding planetary geomorphology? And then, of course, what is the impact of geomorphology on society? Because these are the modern concepts that you should, of course, be aware of. This came out in 2010, I think, so it's quite updated, right? And then the other major thing that has come up since the with the quantitative revolution, the other major thing that has come up is modeling in geomorphology. Now, modeling does not mean only computer-based modeling. There are different types of modeling. You can do it by hand also. You could even do it on the old machines also, old computers also. So these are some of the seminal publications regarding modeling in geomorphology. I will not touch upon this too much because modeling itself is an entirely different lecture, right? It's an entirely in-depth lecture on its own. So I'll just skip through a little bit. But if you're interested, I try and do a lot of work in modeling in geomorphology, and I'll be happy to talk and collaborate, right? So one of the major branches of geomorphology that came up as a result of such quantification and modeling studies and dating studies is tectonic geomorphology, right? And in tectonic geomorphology and climate changes, so these are some of the 4 major books you can look at. Anderson and Burbank, Tectonic Geomorphology, the first one possibly by Morisawa and Hack, their ideas, then Geomorphic Responses to Climate Change by Bull, and Tectonic Geomorphology of Mountains again by Bull. So in tectonic geomorphology, we see the linkages between tectonic uplift, climate-induced degradation, the rock resistance that is there, and how that creates the entire landform and landscape of a particular area. And we try to understand old geomorphic markers. What are the markers that are there in a certain landscape that allow us to see the ancient geomorphic process that has happened? And the modeling I was talking about, today, if we have a certain DEM or a digital elevation model of a landscape like this, we can create a envelope DEM, a larger 3D DEM, minus this from that, and find out the amount of illusion, right? So these are the things that are possible using very, very good 3D imaging 3D imaging machines or very high grade softwares, right? I have also done a lot of work in this realm, but I'm not going to show you the results now because that will be more focusing on the techniques rather than the philosophy and the thought, which is what we are discussing today, right? And so if I integrate all of this, I'll show you one example of the study. Usually we think that erosion leads to the diminishing of the heights of mountains. But there are some very, very special examples that are called tectonic aneurysms. And an aneurysm is basically a blood clot that you have in your heart or in your brain. And it grows and it bursts and you die, right? You can't stop it. A tectonic aneurysm is a very, very fast rising plume of magma from the mantle upwards, which tries to break through the Earth's surface. And on top, if the rocks on top are called the superincumbent structure. That is the superincumbent or the overlying rocks. If there is a river that removes this amount of rock quickly, then the plume will push up faster because the pressure is being removed on top, the load on top is being removed. So the magma plume can push up faster, and then you can have a mountain that actually increases in height as a result of erosion. So the best example of this that we have is the Nanga Parbat, right? Nanga Parbat is 8128 meters height, I think. So that elevation near in the Karakorams. So we have a very beautiful mixing of tectonic geomorphology, that is the pushing up of the magma plume, climatic impact, that is erosion by the Indus River, and then you have the dating and the rock mechanics that has been done, studies that has been done using different dating methods to find out this concept, right? So this is where modern geomorphology is, by combining different concepts and techniques and methods to answer such questions. And so we are now really, really focused on processes, right? So there is a book called Process, and I am not able to show all the books in geomorphology, but I'll just show you some little examples. So each process has its own entire plethora of books, right? And so why are we today so much focused on process geomorphology? Because we think that if we can understand the process, we can predict the form. So if I can understand the process, I can predict the landform. And if I can predict the landform, and then I can understand what use I can make of that particular landscape. If I can predict the process, then I can understand when that process may become hazardous for me or not. And then I can take adequate safety in that regard. All right, so these are some of the books that have come up. Cook, Warren, Gowdy, their beautiful book on desert geomorphology. Ritter's Process Geomorphology, that's a newer book. Seminal book on Badlands, that is by Brian and Yair. Slope Stability, Coastal Morphology, many other such books are there, right? You can, Sweeting's book, this is Sturgill's book on limestone, but Marjorie Sweeting's work on karst geomorphology is also seminal, right? So you can look through those areas. And there are Also interdisciplinary books like Gerard's book on soil geomorphology. Then you have Rocks and Landform by Gerard again, right? So these kind of books are there. You can have a look at them. Okay. So what is the difference that has come? Earlier, you have studied the hill slope processes of Davis, Penck, King, right? You have studied the hill slope evolution, landscape evolution. So earlier, hill slope evolution would be qualitative approach, descriptive approach. Then it became semi-quantitative, right? This is Dalrymple's nine segment model of the hill slope, quantitative. Today, it is numerical. So we are going from qualitative to quantitative to numerical modeling. All right. So today, what we are basically doing in slope studies is we are framing an equation for to estimate the slope. We are framing an equation to approximate the slope properties. We are fitting in the coefficients which are applicable to that particular area, and that is why I need to do field work. Computer এসে গেছে মানে এই নয় যে field work is off. Field work is absolutely fundamental in geomorphology still today. So we do field work to find out the coefficients that are there, right? For example, if we do a flume studies in the Himalayas to see how much erosion happens as a result of a river flowing, as is done by people like your Jerome Lave and Michael Attal, right? So what they will do is they will study the rate of weathering of pebbles in their flumes, then take the rate of weathering of the pebbles, input them into the equation, and then estimate at what rate erosion will happen in the river. So we are now using numerical models like this. So earlier, see, you had such models of Davis, Penck, King. Today, those models are converted into such process response or mathematical equations. So we have gone basically from this descriptive diagrams to graphs, mathematical graphs and diagrams, and using that through equations. And so there are, if you go to the CSDMS University of Colorado website, there are a lot of beautiful landscape evolution models that are available that you can use if you know a little bit of MATLAB or Python programming. There is something called LandLab. In LandLab, you can actually simulate 10,000 years of landscape evolution. So you can simulate and go back into the past, or you can go into the future also. Topo Toolbox is another software that allows you to extract long profiles of rivers and model them accordingly, right? So you can look at the CSDMS webpage. There are many other modeling softwares that are out there. I won't be able to focus on all of them at this point in time. For example, for flood modeling, there is HECRAS, right? For rainfall to runoff modeling, there is HEC-HMS, right? So all these things are there. For riverbank erosion modeling, there is the Banks model by Dave Rosgen, right? So there are so many models today. All of them have equations. Your job is to go to the field, find the data for them, determine the correct coefficients, and then run the model, match them and validate them, and then publish your results. So this is where geomorphology is today. It's what you could say is it is a very positivist, empiricist approach as taken by Auguste Comte and the followers of logical positivism and empiricism, right? Can I be heard? Yes? Hello?
Yes.
I'll take 10 more minutes. I'm sorry. So what we have today is we have these kind of systems and flowcharts and models. And so so some people have framed, for example, a global equation to show erosion taking place from all river basins, and they have made a erosion map of the entire world, right? This is again your modern geomorphological approaches that are there today. Okay, so like I said, we are into measuring rates and dates. So rates means at what rates are things eroding. So we can use analog models, we can use dating aspects, right? For example, we are here using cosmogenic nuclides, rock carbon dating, right? And then there is a range of processes and landforms for which we have found out dates. And what we see is that the scale of a landform also matters a lot. The larger a landform is, the more time period it can stay untouched. For example, a little sand ripple will be destroyed in a matter of few hours during high tide and low tide. But large mountains can subsist for a longer duration of time. So scales are related to rates also in geomorphology and size. Okay, and then so that is why we have a temporal and spatial scale in geomorphology. This was first given by Peltier. He has a classification and others. So this is just representative of that. Then there are dating techniques now in geomorphology. I am not really a dating expert, so I won't really go into this. I'll just tell you that there are a lot of dating methods. There are absolute dating methods, relative dating methods. You can do dendrochronology, which looks at the tree ring age, right? You can look at cosmogenic nuclides, which basically looks at the exposure age, that is from when has the sample been exposed to sunlight or radiation. Then you have OSL, that is optical spectral luminescence dating, that looks at when was a sediment sample last buried or last saw sunlight, right? So we have a range of dating methods, and that helps us to bring out the evolution of the landscape and the rate of denudation or uplift of the landscape, right? And then going to the final part of this presentation, the next change that has come post 1990s onwards, and ideas about global warming and everything that has come up, is geomorphology, how it will be in terms of helping societies. So one book that has been brought out recently by Andrew Gowdy and Heather Wiles, husband and wife duo at University of Oxford, is geomorphology in the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene is the term coined, maybe it has been replaced by the Meghalayan today, but it was coined term by, I think, Paul Crutzen and Ian Zalesiewicz. So to mark that period in Earth history when human beings, basically after the Industrial Revolution, when human beings have started to leave a specific marker in the rock, right? And more so after the your atomic bomb detonations during the Second World War, when we have that radiation layer present in the soil as a result of the radioactive fallout. So human beings are now starting to leave a little bit of record in the geological strata. And so Gowdy says that geomorphology must serve societies, right? And so these are the 6-7 points he says that geomorphology should take up: mapping of resources, stopping of hazards, surveys of hazards, okay, helping societies to bounce back after hazards, right? So these are the things that should come up. And some of the best work in this has been done by people called Logzi and Sabo, right? So they have framed something called the human impact model that deals with erosivity and erodibility to human activity. Erosivity means what is the power of a certain agent to do erosion. Erodibility means what is the weakness of a certain artifact or rock that it will get denuded very, very easily. And human beings can affect both. For example, if I do deforestation along a hill slope, then I increase the erosivity of the rainfall, because now the rainfall will not be infiltrating or captured by the tree roots. It will have more power running across the slope, and it will have greater erosional power. And I will also increase the erodibility of the rock, because now the rock will not be protected by the soil layer. The rock will be exposed. As the water runs across it during rainfall, it will get eroded very, very easily. So human beings really can do such changes, right? And Sabo, in their book Anthropogenic Geomorphology, by Logzi and Sabo, they framed a very, very new classification of landforms called the man-made classification of anthropogenic landforms. So like monatogenic, urbanogenic, agrogenic. So agrogenic means what? Agrogenic means agriculture-based genesis of landforms. And there are only 3 types of landforms that human beings create, or other 3 processes through which we create. The first one is excavation. Excavation means khodai kora, right? To dig out. P is planation, means to level, flat kora. And A is accumulation, mane dhipi toiri kora, to pile up, right? So think about this, right? In a field, your excavation landform is the pond that you create to store the water, the canal that you create to transfer water to your field. In a cultivation plot, the planation landform is the terrace cultivation that you are doing, where you are making the land surface flat. Accumulation is the field bund, kheter je alta, that is the piling up of the soil. In a similar way, you can classify all other landforms EPA type, right? So this is the new classification of landforms that is there today. This is very, very prevalent. And then something else. There is another researcher called Mary Thornbush, and she is doing a lot of work in urban geomorphology, and also very, very new areas, geomorphology in churchyards, or necrogeomorphology, right? Geomorphology in dead places, where, if you go to a churchyard, then you will have a certain tombstone, and on the tombstone you will have a certain date when the person was buried. And now if you go and examine these tombstones again after 100 years or 200 years, you will see the rate of weathering that has taken place. So in which kind of climate, in which part of the churchyard, or in which part of the country, what kind of weathering has happened even more. So even this is geomorphology, right? This is a new type of urban geomorphology that has come up, and we can study rock weathering rates as a result from this. And next time you go to a churchyard, maybe you can look at the rates of weathering of the granite or the limestone or the sandstone that is there, right? So this is something that is done. Another branch of morphology that has come up, this is again coming up from the geoconservation principle, is that demarcation and preservation of geomorphosites in India. That geodiversity, these things, the concept of geodiversity has come up through the writings of Murray Gray and Emmanuel Reynaud and others. And so they talk about that every geomorphic landscape has value. There is economic value, there is aesthetic value. Economic value means if there are minerals to be found, so the landscape is valuable. Aesthetic value means if you go to a place with beautiful scenery, so some geomorphic feature is there, so it has aesthetic value. It has also got value for folklore and religion. Think about this, right? People go to the Kailash mountain. Why? Because it's a geomorphic artifact and they go and worship there, right? So all geomorphic features also have different kinds of values. They are just not landforms. So you must preserve these things. So as a result, GSI has done a geoheritage monument mapping in India. We have Professor Kale from Pune has brought out Atlas of Geomorphosites in India. India also has a pending geoheritage bill that is, pending in the Indian Parliament. We need to pass that because otherwise a lot of such monuments are being destroyed by stone quarrying and other activities. So if you're passionate about saving geomorphic features, if you're passionate about saving geomorphic landscapes, this is one area of work you should go into, right? Okay. So this is the trajectory of geomorphology that I'm coming to the end now. So what are the trajectory of geomorphology that we are now going into? So these are the 6 that were identified by Michael Church in his writing. That we are now trying to look at process response systems, flux and fluxes. We have to reconcile geomorphic information across different scales because we get nanoscale information from very, very high resolution microscopes. We get meter scale resolution from high resolution satellite image, and then we can image the whole Earth and survey the whole Earth also. So how to integrate all these information together? So it's a realm of big data. We need very, very large computational systems going ahead. Then very important, how to simplify the complexity, how to find the intersections with life. At the AGU is the American Geophysical Union, I think, or Geological Union, I forget. So William Dietrich, very, very important geologist. Couple of years ago, he gave a lecture called, "Is there a topographic signature of life?" So if there is life in a certain landscape, does it create certain, identifiable landforms? Can we use those principles to search for a similar presence of life in other planets? Right. So how does landform react where it meets life? That is a very, very interesting question. Right. Okay. Then role of climate and integrating the human impact. Also, what Wainwright suggests is that we need to incorporate more science into physical geography. Right. Because in geography, we have a problem that, we are a little bit afraid of maths and chemistry and physics. But if you look at one of the books, Anderson and Anderson, Geomechanics and Chemistry of the Landscape, so a lot of physics and chemistry has gone into it. And it is very, very important that we understand the modern science that is there, use that in the models so that to be able to do proper geomorphology today. That is the advanced geomorphology that is going on. Right. So just some examples, if you are curious, some of the major journals that publish geomorphological work in different branches. This is taken from the first chapter of the Sage Handbook of Geomorphology. I definitely suggest you read that book. All right. And these are just a selection. There are many, many more journals that are there. Some of these are entire subject specific. Some of them are process specific. Right. So please have a look at those things. And then, since we are still enmeshed in the Daviesian ideas, does our own subject also have a youth, mature, old stage? So maybe geomorphology's youth was the 1900 to 1960, right? Then the next part was the maturity, that is 1960 to 2000, when we have these data sets coming. I mean, today, then we have old age, right? Going 2000 to 2010, we are a little bit going into the old age. But again, there is a possibility that we are undergoing rejuvenation. Why? Because we are doing new types of geomorphology. We are intersecting geomorphology with ecology. We are intersecting geomorphology with other aspects of planetary science. We are using big data. So, even in terms of our own subject, we can have a youth, mature, old rejuvenation phase. And it is, as you are the old generation, amar boyesh hoye geche, right? So, ami gechi. So, as you are the new generation going ahead, so it is now your job to take the rejuvenation forward, right? To use better types of data, use better types of models, to think what you are using, right? Why you are using. There's a very, very famous quote which is attributed to Richard Cholle, that if you speak of theory to a geomorphologist, he instinctively reaches for his auger. Think first, do next, right? Don't land up in the field thinking अब field में जाते हैं फिर देखेंगे क्या करेगा, right? Think what you are doing, frame what you are doing. So that is why we are doing this course on thought, this lecture on thought. That's very, very important, right? Now I'll show you something on that regard by a very, very famous person from India, the father of Indian geography, Shiva Prasad Chatterjee. I'll show you something from him on that regard, how to do field work. Anyhow, so then what are the main challenges facing geology? First one, I'll just read out what does our planet's past tell us about its future? How can we better understand the patterns that are there on the Earth's surface? How do landscape record climate and tectonics? How do landscape change? There are so many questions that to which we know half the answers. For example, we know that mountains will go up and erosion will happen, but at what rates? Which part of the mountain will be at what rate? These are things that we don't, we are still trying to find out coefficients. Why? Because every rock type is different, every area spatial scales are different, so the same equation may fit everywhere, but the constants of the equation will be different. So that is why we need to do still a lot of field studies, and there is a lot of scope of work going ahead. How do biogeochemical cycles interact with geomorphology? How do material transport laws affect the Earth's surface? How do ecosystems evolve in respect to geomorphology? Right, so these things are all very, very important. Then how will we be in the Anthropocene? How can we have a sustainable Earth using geomorphological principles and ideas? Right. So these are the research initiatives that SAGE Handbook of Geomorphology suggests, that you study the interaction of landscapes and climate, again, which is very important in a global warming scenario, climate change scenario. Right? Okay. Then how? Yes. Hello. Shall I continue? Hello.
So someone has.
Okay, I'll continue. So how to quantify landscape dynamics across time and scales, right? Very, very important. For example, there is something called GST, not goods and services tax. It is called the gravel sand transition zone, that is there along the forefront of the Himalayas, where all the major fans are formed. So the evolution of the GST, how the GST changes over time. How far will a gravel roll before it will become sand? How far will that sand be transported before it will become clay? So these are some lot of questions that are still to be answered, and a lot of work are being done in this regard. And what will be the future landscape of the Anthropocene, right? And so I am mainly from fluvial geomorphology. And so if I show you a small diagram in this regard, right? If I go back, if I show you a small diagram in this regard, as I said that, concepts evolve. And so we start off with Gilbert and Davis, then we go into Mackin, the graded concept, right? The definition of the graded concept, then Lane's balance, Dari Pallata jodi mone thake, where discharge into channel slope has to balance out sediment amount into sediment weight, right? Then Horton's laws, then we go into Schum's ideas. Then today we have ideas of Dietrich, ideas of Montgomery, Rosgen, channel classification, right? So, and then today we have books by Gary Beardley and Kirsty Friars from Australia and New Zealand, where they talk about river futures and river conservation and those things, right? So if you are studying fluvial, you could do this for every branch of geomorphology, right? I don't have that much time, so I won't go there. But if you are a teacher teaching fluvial geomorphology, if you are a student studying fluvial geomorphology, maybe you could do what I do if you want, that give your students 1 or 2 seminal books from each decade. Start from the 1950s. Let's say start with Leopold Woolman and Miller, then Morisawa, her books, then Schum's books, then Richards. Then let us come to David Knighton, Fluvial Forms and Processes in 1990s. In between, you can also fit in your works by Cholle and others. And then you can come to Rosgen, 1994, the river restoration concept. Then Roe Charlton, I think 2006, that is when her book came out. And then you have Kirsty Friars and really Geomorphic Analysis of River Systems, one of the best river books that I know right now. Right? So if you string these books together, the student gets the idea of how the subject has evolved, how the concepts have changed, which concepts have stayed constant, which concepts have modified. And so those are the research frontiers. So they will take it ahead over there. Right? So that I think is very, very important. Right? Also, if you can give a profile of the geographers themselves, right? So that will also help. Right? So my research student, my PhD student Shiny and I, we did some work. So looking at which are the main, key words in geomorphological work that are coming up. So at one point of time, controlling floods was very important, right? Today we see that river restoration taking care of rivers is very, very important. We publish this paper. You can download it and read it if you want. So today, we know a lot about the physical laws of the river. Of course, we need to find area specific constants, much more fine tune the formulas, but we know a lot about the river physical laws, right? Today, we are more into river management, river futures, river preservation. So that is something to be looked at. Then my friend Rajoshi from East Calcutta Girls College and I, we came up with this diagram where we look at how geomorphology should not be studied in isolation, how we should integrate it with the economic aspects, social aspects of the area. So you can take a river, right? You can take a river from any part of Bengal. One side you have Ramesh's house, one side you have Usman's house. So is the river a social boundary also between a maybe Hindu village and maybe a Muslim village, right? How does the river bend affect land degradation, and as a result, how does it affect your soil tillage and agriculture output? So these things are something that can be integrated. You can read that paper if you want. It's been published, right? And then what are the kinds of innovative works that are coming up? Sex that moves mountains, right? So this is a beautiful work that was done by Alexander Vermeer, and this is Vermeer. So what they have shown is that salmon fish, when salmon fish, they are anadromous fish like hilsa, they swim up the rivers to spawn. So what the fish does is, if it's a gravel bed river, with its tail here with its tail, it sweeps the gravel on the bed of the river because it creates a little hollow, because that is where it will lay the eggs. So you can see this is where the hollow has been formed. All the coarse river particles have been moved away. So
Hello, sir. Hello.
It looks like Priyank has net issue.
Yes.
Saying that in the beginning itself.
Just wait a few sec. He will rejoin.
hello, hello, hello.
Yes, sir. শোনা যাচ্ছে।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ শোনা, সরি, হয়ে এসছে আমার, আর 5 মিনিট নেবো, একটু কেটে গেছিল। Apologies for the same. Right. So can the PPT be seen? Yes.
Yes, Priyank.
Yes, yes.
Yes, it can be seen, right? So I will carry on from there. So so this is where did you last get me? Did you Rajeshri, did you see this?
Yes, Brian Ianites. Yeah,
Yes, hello.
Brian Ianites. Sex that move the mountains.
Yeah. So what I was saying is this is the kind of work they are doing, where they are studying where salmon fish are spawning, and because the salmon fish creates small pools, those pools allow more erosion to take place, and as a result, actual river long profile itself changes, and that leads to accelerated rate of erosion on the mountains. This is something really. Can I be heard? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Fine. So sorry for the interruption. Um, I'll just start. I don't think I'll just start sharing again. Um I'll just have 5 more minutes to take. Sadly, it has been interrupted. So can this be seen now? Yes.
It is beginning to come. It's not yet there.
Okay.
Now it
Yeah.
can be seen.
Yeah. So this is the paper by Aguilar and others, and they talk of critical zones. What is the critical? Hello.
Yes, Priyank, it can be heard. So yeah, like
দেখা যাচ্ছে?
yes, it can be seen.
I can be seen. Sharingটা হচ্ছে?
It can be seen. তাই বললাম।
Acha. I can also be seen. Okay, thank you. So I'll quickly end. So this is Jan Zalesevich's book, The Earth After Us. You know what signature we will leave? That is bomb turbation, the effect of the bombs on a landscape. Right. So such studies are also being done. Then we are studying different areas, mountain geomorphology, because mountains have their own landscape, their own tectonics, and that affects the societies also. Right. So we are looking into that also. Those things are being studied as well. right? So that is very, very important. You can look into this book by Slaymaker. And then very, very important by your Rebecca Lave, we have the critical physical geography that has come. How does physical geography relate to human concerns, right? How does physical geography answers or geomorphological answers can be used to address climate change issues? Right? This is a new branch that has come up. This is very, very important. If you want, you can do research in this.
Turn off the damn camera, man.
Am I there? Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just quickly end, Karan. This is becoming a huge issue. So I was sharing, I think. So let me just share this and end. Right. Share. So is it happening? Yeah. So this is something that is there. Critical physical geography is there. দেখা যাচ্ছে? হ্যাঁ না.
That's it.
Right. So this is something. And finally, because this is a lecture at Vivekananda College, but apart from that, not only because of that, um, there is a huge question on the role of ladies in in physical geography, female in geomorphology, right? Why do we have so many girls studying geomorphology but not going on ahead? What are the concerns? What problems do they face with fieldwork? What problems do they face become literature? So there's a whole gender aspect to geomorphological research also, right? And as a result, there are some books that have been brought out in geology on the role of women in the history of geology, on the geological travels taken by women and their discoveries. And then these things are very, very important, right? So there are some major female geoscientists like Morisawa, C.M. King, Kirsty Friars, Ellen Vole, Heather Wiles, but the number is less, right? So this basically asks what can be done to enable more girls to take up physical geography, more girls to take up geomorphological studies, and that's very important because so many of them study, but very few of them carry on with physical geography, right, and geomorphology. This is another research area in geomorphology, the gender aspect of it. So anyhow, this is what I had to say, that geomorphology is mostly going out of our hands because people from geology, engineering, and maths are taking it up, right? Practical applications are much more, and today we have to be a lot science-based, science-focused to be able to go into that realm. These are some books that I usually show. This is the Mechanics and Chemistry of Landscape. Please see this book. This is done entirely differently to normal geomorphology textbooks. This is a treatise on geomorphology, which much of the material has been taken. This is Fluvial Guide for Remote Sensing, where you have remote sensing just for fluvial studies, and see how specialized science has become now. Hydrology has become not just one hydrology book, but 4 types of books. This is the analysis of rainfall. This is how rainfall will change into runoff. This is how the runoff will go and create a flood. This is the risk factor of the flood. All right. So these things are very important. And 2 other books that I have not touched upon, but you should read if you want to know further about the philosophy of physical geography and geomorphology. One is Turgill and Roy's book, Contemporary Meanings in Physical Geography. And another one is a very, very insightful book by Rhodes and Thorne on scientific nature of geomorphology. Colin Thorne's own book called Theoretical Geomorphology is again a fantastic volume to look into these various aspects of the philosophical evolution of thought. Right. Also, if you like some popular reading, I'm sure you're aware of the Oxford very short introduction series. These just cost 200 rupees. They're just 100 pages and they fit in your pocket, but they give a lot of information in a very nice manner about geomorphology and different aspects of it. So if you want to read those things, please go ahead. Right. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the interruptions and taking so much time. Right. I'll stop here. That's it.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Patel, for your well-researched, integrated this presentation. This is very informative and full of insight. A sincere apology for the title slide. There is a typological error in your name.
That's
And now over to the question answer session. There are already 4 questions. Should I start
Madam,
those?
yes, ask, madam.
From Rupin Shamunto, Vivekananda College for Women. What is the future trend of geomorphological thought?
Okay, so some of the things we discussed. One is